Well, hello, friends, and welcome to Chasing Shadows, which is a supplemental podcast series from the Austin Stone that will hopefully serve to support our current sermon series that is working through the ancient book of Ecclesiastes. Our hope, our desire for these podcast episodes is that they'll serve three purposes. Firstly, that they'll help you to process what you've heard in the sermons, which we know can be dense and long and complex, and so we want you to be able to have more opportunities to think about them and to ask questions about them during the week. Secondly, to prepare you for what's coming up in the week that follows so that you can arrive just ready to hear from the Spirit. And then lastly, to help you to participate in the formative and sanctifying work of God that He's doing through the preaching and teaching of His Word at our church. We don't want to just be hearers of the Word, we want to be doers as well. And so I want to give you some opportunities to take some practical steps in response to what you have heard. My name's Ross Lester. I'm one of the pastors here at the Stone. I'll be your host for this series, and I'm joined by my co-host, Val Hamilton, and by a guest today who's got a perfect voice for podcasts, Tyler David, and I'll introduce you to them in a sec, but we're very excited that they could join us today. And so, Val, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at the church.
All right. Yes. So I am married to Rex from HR, which means I don't get away with anything, actually. And I've got two kids who are less than a year apart. So they are 3 and 4 years old, and our daycare is closed right now. So it is the part of the year where they're trying to test my resilience and if I can make it. And I've got a couple more days. But we're going to be okay. But at the Stone, I get to work on our central staff to support congregations doing things like our classes and any of our equipping resources. Even got to help on the team that made this book possible with you and Jake. So
that's so fun.
It's great.
And you're like an OG pretty much at the Stone.
I said I'm like in tree years. I'm just an old oak in staff years at the Austin
You're
Stone.
like the giving tree.
That's what you Thank you for noticing. Finally,
I see you. Yeah.
That's right. Me and Tyler were actually in the exact same residency class here at the Stone. So back in 2009, it was incredible.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. You both stayed.
It's
a miracle of grace.
When you have no other options, you can stay.
You just stay. You just keep going.
TD.
Tell us what
With
you
that
do.
optimistic spin on the world, which is very Ecclesiastes,
It's
by the
very on
way.
brand.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do here.
I have been on staff at the Stone in September, it'll be 15 years.
Wow.
I have had a lot of jobs at the Stone, but for the past decade plus, I've been leading our downtown congregation and honestly trying to figure out what does it mean for the gospel to impact kind of the urban dynamic of Austin and a younger sort of demographic of people. And I've had that privilege to do it for a long time. And as our church has gone through a lot of iterations, my family's gone through a lot of changes because obviously me and Lauren have been married for 15 years. We have 4 kids, and it's even wild for me to think about that when I started at downtown, I had no kids. Now I have all the kids, and my oldest is 13. And so getting to see her now honestly be a part of the generation of people that I've been preaching to and leading, she's closer in age to the people at downtown than I am, which has been a really interesting dynamic in college students. Like I'm talking to college students who are closer to Elle's age than they are to mine. And that has kept me on my toes and helped me continue to go, what does it mean for the gospel to be relevant in every generation, in every context? And I've gotten to be part of this church and try to do that for 15 years now. So
that's amazing.
That's my role.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how downtown's doing? So many people who have come to the Stone over the years kind of came through the downtown congregation. And our church has changed a lot over the years. Our city's changed a lot over the years. And UT has changed a lot over the years. Why don't you give us just a current insight into the health and vibrance that you're seeing in our downtown congregation?
Yeah, it's interesting because the dynamic has been 15 years ago, it was still young and up and coming people, but they were in a very different generation of people. Yeah. And now as we enter into Gen Z and what does it mean to reach people in this context, I've been really encouraged because the seeds that were true of Austin Stone in 2008, 2009, when I first got there, they're still true of downtown, but the sort of topsoil is different, if you will. Yeah. The seeds are the same. The DNA is the same. The gospel is the same. The radical obedience to Jesus is the same, but they're in a different topsoil. So the questions are different and the problems are different. And what it means to be a Christian at the University of Texas or even downtown is different because it was hard in 2008, 2009. It's much harder now.
Right.
And so what's fun to see is it's the same kind of person God's producing at the Austin Stone, but they're in a new environment. And so I think what I've been trying to do with the leadership down there and also with you, Ross, and different people is how do we get that same DNA that is, the faith handed down once for all to the saints in new context and new sort of forms that have the same old gospel doing the same old things it always does. And so I'm really encouraged by where we're at. Being a mobile site for our church continues to both come with cost, but it's still that blessing of you're forced to call people up into things they wouldn't normally do. And that's the blessing of being mobile, is you actually call people to serve in ways that you wouldn't maybe need them if you weren't mobile. And so I think most people would prefer a site. I mean, my God, I would. Yeah. But I don't resent it, because it still enables us to be in the heart of Austin in a way where most churches who exist in that area of the town are older, historic, and some have even forsaken the gospel in some significant ways. And so I see our presence there as worth doing whatever we have to be a gospel witness there.
Yeah. We've also seen a lot of vibrant church plants kind of rise up in downtown Austin and fade away. It's just a very difficult place to keep that kind of vibrant work going.
Yeah. And it is, I tell people all the time, it is basically rises and falls with leadership energy. Like I don't have history to rely on, because you're brand new to our church and maybe the church. Right. So we're your first church experience. And so it's going to be as good as the leadership makes it. Yeah. And I think, again, that can feel daunting during COVID and during all the complexities of the last 4 years. But I think what it has done is God has kept like a remnant in that way, which he always does before he does great works, is he purifies, he has their holy remnant, and then they begin to go, no, God is able to do things again. And what I see afresh happening is post even honestly, Ecclesiastes this past Sunday, is seeing people go, oh, so we're never going to reach utopia here. You're like, no. Yeah. So we all thought post-COVID, the world was just going to get back into order. And we're like, it's not happening. And in some ways, that's making people go, then maybe it's on us to actually work with the Holy Spirit to build something different. Yeah. And so that's been cool to see. The pruning God's done is actually what I'm praying for, is that it's the beginning of a new work with the same old seeds in a very different context.
Yeah. I'll say I came to the Austin Stone in college when it was just about 100 people in 2003. It had just started. I was a freshman, but I remember, very similar to what you're saying, when they needed me to help set up the church and tear down the church. And if you served at that time in kids, you got a little cassette tape that was like, here's the sermon, you missed it because we only had one service back then, right? But I also remember the powerful nature of realizing, maybe for the first time, because I was very young in my faith, I just came to faith in high school, that what God says through his word actually matters for life today. And it was such a powerful thing to see, everything I need for life and godliness is actually here. And all the questions I was asking, you're right, the questions may be different today, but we're all trying to answer some question about where is significance, how do I matter, what counts.
Which is what's fun about our church is the reputation it's built, is people are like, well, y'all are the Bible church, so you guys go through books of the Bible. I'm like, I love that that's the reputation that we have, is that some freshmen visited and we were doing a different series. They're like, I thought you guys taught through the Bible. I'm like, I love that your expectation was that, you guys just teach through the Bible each Sunday. You're like, that's exactly who we are. And I'm so glad that that's what you came in expecting.
That's right.
So we kicked off our Ecclesiastes series this last Sunday. We had all 6 of our congregation pastors preaching through, which is part of our preaching model, in that in different weeks we have different voices and we share the pulpit freely and readily across those congregations, all preaching the same message, which is fun and exciting and different and slightly nuanced in all the different contexts. And so we all had a slightly different experience of teaching and receiving the same content. Val, what was your experience of sitting under the text this past weekend? Did you leave with any takeaways or nagging questions?
Yeah, I think I was at North, so I got to hear Will Boston open up the word, and
he's the best.
He's great. He is so endearing. He's like a Nate Bargatze.
He is Nate Bargatze
with the gospel. So it was a really powerful sermon. But I think one of the things right out of the gate that really landed for me was when he said, vanity of vanities, and then he translated that word to temporary, fleeting. And that just kind of stuck with me, that temporary nature, because I think so much. I was even I just turned 40 this summer, and I've just been kind of thinking about halfway through my life, and even things are starting to break down and wear out. And so much of life, I feel like, is trying to tell me stay young and don't face that. Try and extend as long as I can. And while there's, I think, wisdom in taking care of our bodies, I do think there was a part of me that was like, you know what? I think maybe it's a gift that sometimes you look in the mirror and you see some wrinkles and you see some graying and you see some impact of time to remind you that you're temporary and fleeting in a sense. And so that was one of the things, even when he just said that, I was like, that was a powerful kind of reflection on maybe, again, maybe it's a good thing to be reminded every so often. Maybe we need to bring wrinkles back. Make them.
But so your takeaway was just mail it in?
Dial it in. Just be okay. I'm not saying like stay out of the sun, moisturize, but also maybe it's a good thing to kind of look in the mirror and be reminded.
Temporary thing is so humbling, but so freeing actually at the same time, right? Which
absolutely.
is what Ecclesiastes really should press us towards. Both of those things.
Yeah.
Tyler, you got to preach through the first 11 verses of chapter 1. What kind of stuck with you, and how do you think it was received amongst that congregation? That's a loaded thing to ask a preacher, because we very seldom have an accurate view of how people received it. But I want to know anyway.
Yeah, it's the perfect time to ask is the Monday after. Actually, as luck would have it, is my experience of yesterday was complicated because often, and everyone can understand this in different roles or vocations that you have, is people can experience the way you're serving them, and you can experience the way you're serving them in two totally different ways. Right. This is one of those Sundays where the sermon went well. My experience of it was not enjoyable because my iPad was messing up the entire time, and so it was flipping pages, and has annotations popping up, and I'm like trying to mess with it as I'm preaching, and my sweat level was too high. There's a lot happening. And so my experience of it was vanity of vanities. Preaching is not worth it. So
your hearers experience something they're very used to, though. Someone talking to them while just looking at this.
That's exactly right. They're like, yes, this guy gets me. I would like to be talked to with no eye contact, please. But the actual, the content of it that stood out to me, and even some feedback after the sermon that I received was, there's so much in these texts, because again, these sermons, if we preached everything we could preach, they would be 4 hours long, because there's just so many concepts and ideas.
Mine nearly was.
I tried.
Yeah.
But the thing that stood out to me was nothing new and nothing remembered. Those kinds of ideas. There's nothing new, there's nothing remembered. But I actually wanted to, because I think it's easy, honestly, when you read the Bible, is to not ask hard questions over what you just read. Yeah. Because you can say things, well, it says nothing new, nothing remembered. And I'm like, well, iPhones didn't exist 20 years ago. What does it mean, nothing new? And Solomon's writing in a time, or whoever the author is writing at a time where, change and inventions are happening very slow, and memory of the past is harder. But I'm like, we live in an age with the cloud and terabytes. So what does that mean that nothing's remembered? So those two things really, I wanted to camp out on those realities, because nothing new means something that I think at first glance, it could maybe feel like it's a preacher speak in the text. Like he doesn't really mean what he's saying, basically. But that idea of every new development we think will fix those fundamental human problems, and they still can't. And that was fun to explore. But also the nothing remembered really got me, because we're in a time, and all of us as human beings want to feel seen and want to feel heard and want to feel remembered. And it's one of those sermons, because we have 13 coming in this series, where you don't want to preach everything in the first sermon. But I was wanting to get to 1 Corinthians 15 or resurrection, not being in vain. But the thing that I landed on was Jesus asking questions like, what does it benefit you if you gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? Yeah. And the idea that the thief on the cross asked Jesus to remember him. Yeah. And that really stuck to me, of the ability for Jesus to remember you when everyone else forgets you. So even in an age where you have unlimited information, but that makes my information almost meaningless, because it just fades into the abyss of infinite amount of information. So we want to be remembered, but even when you have all the technology that could remember you, you'll still get lost in the shuffle. Yeah. And the idea that Jesus can remember you, because of the thief's name, we don't even know. Yeah. But if Jesus knew his name, that was enough for him to last. And so that hit me in a way. And I think the whole tenor of the series, when Ross, you know this as much as anybody, is the text kind of dictates your tone as you preach. And I had a couple people come up to me and talk about how my tonality had shifted and really helped them, which I thought was fascinating to go, because it is a more of a professor sort of interactive way of teaching. So it was funny how that even made me teach differently, because I'm trying to imagine people on a couch in front of me, because we can get to this in a second, but this book, it will not be impactful if you're not introspective. Yeah. Right. If you want to just keep it high level and lofty, it won't have the impact it's meant to have. Yeah. And that's why I think preaching can actually make or break people's experience of this book, because you can make it very lofty and esoteric, and you're like, I don't know what it means for my life. But to get it down at a couch level, what do I do? Yeah. This is a really powerful text. And I thought it was fascinating, people's response going, oh, this is helpful for me to remember we can't create utopia here. And I was like, I thought we all knew that, but it's easy to forget in a day and age where we kind of feel like we have enough power and technology to do anything.
That's right.
And so it served people, but again, my iPad was messing up the entire time. Yeah. So I was like, I don't know what's happening. I hope it's good.
So first, a couple of things. Firstly, don't preach from an iPad. Just print it on paper.
Print it out.
Or just write it down. Or just memorize it. Come on, Tyler.
You know what?
You can do it.
What I'm hearing is no notes. Got it.
No, actually, scratch that. Just write it down on some paper, and you'll be fine. Secondly, though, that notion in the sermon of there's no novelty or no real memory, that was really impactful for me in the way that it plays out into our cultural moment, where we're seeing a huge resurgence of Greek philosophy, particularly the notion of Stoicism as an answer to those two particular problems. So people are starting to see the circular nature of history. And so leaning on Stoicism, which has two great enemies, right? And so the Stoic has two great enemies, hope and nostalgia. They say, don't be hopeful, right? Because there's nothing new.
Right.
Don't give into nostalgia because there's nothing worth remembering.
Right.
And so that the way that you then live in contrast to that is just embrace the moment and seal yourself off from the future and the past. But that is not the call to the Christian, right? Who lives with this everlasting hope that is actually beyond the horizon of what we can see. But it also has this great history of the saints behind them, and the sure and lasting promise that they will be remembered, that their names will be written in a book that can never be closed, right? And so we are people of memory and of hope. But it was fascinating to me how that plays out, how modern it reads. It comes across like, oh, this is really, this sounds current. It could be today.
It's interesting to say that. I don't know if I've thought about the hope piece in the sense of we came out of a season as a church where we're learning how to lament. And then it's almost like we forgot how to hope too. And it's almost as if Ecclesiastes is like, oh, you want to hear lament? I'm going to show you how to really stare at how broken things are. But I found that because you're right. Because we were talking about even picking this book, Ross, we were kind of feeling this book can be helpful in us this fall to help people go, don't look here to solve the deep problems. Look to God to solve these deep problems. But then it also could make it feel like it feels bleak in the culture and it feels bleak in the text in a way. But it was interesting for that to be this is almost reteaching us how do you have hope in the face of honest sort of diagnostic about how hard things are. And I think even this last Sunday, that's what was beginning to happen. People to go like, oh, this is going to tell the truth in ways most people won't tell the truth about what the realities are, which I think as a preacher sets you up to preach what the gospel hope actually is in a profound way. That Ecclesiastes does uniquely.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of hit on this, Tyler, and I think you mentioned it too, Ross. Just as we get into Ecclesiastes, we spent a lot of time in the build-up thinking about who wrote this. You even mentioned like who we think wrote it. So how does who wrote it and the style in which the narrative is written, how much does that matter for people as they're coming into Ecclesiastes in the coming weeks to keep in mind as they jump into the text?
So the Bible is so mysterious and so powerful, right? In that people could read it without some kind of academic understanding. It could still be taught from it, through the power of the Spirit who ultimately authored the words. But it does open up another layer when you start to investigate whose words are these and what is he trying to say. And I think it is important to get to an understanding that obviously this is based on the life of Solomon. There's no one else really who we can see has an imprint that matches up. But because of the narrative form and the way that it shifts from third person to first person, back to first person again, with some commentary in between, I think the most compelling argument that we found for what it is in kind of keeping with Tremper Longman's supposition or conclusion that it is actually like an annotated or recorded autobiography taken from Solomon's thoughts, but given commentary by someone who's then collated them and then summoned people together and said, okay, here's someone who went before you. He tried it all, and here's his discovery. Why I think that helps is because we have the historic account of Solomon's life. And we know then that late in his life, he's apostate, right? He's walked away from the faith in a profound way. And we're not sure of the full extent of that, but he's not in good shape spiritually. That helps us to interpret some of the things in Ecclesiastes, which seem to then fly in the face of the rest of Scripture. And it helps us to know why they jar with us so much. Because as hopeful Christians, there should be some things that come out of an apostate's mouth that we go like, wait, is that right?
Right.
that we need to then go to the rest of Scripture to interpret. So I think the best way for us to see it is to see it as kind of someone found Solomon's journals and wrote an intro and a conclusion and put them together and said, here's what his life experience amounted to. That for me is the most helpful way to be able to interpret it in a way that doesn't clash with the rest of Scripture.
Well, and I think what we're going to see is so much of what he tried is so much what we're still trying, right? And so
yes.
I think that's probably the next question is, as you guys both preached this sermon this weekend, did you have a hope, a one practical thing, if someone who sat under that teaching and as they're confronted with this book and what's coming, what's a practical takeaway?
For me, it was the courage to tell the truth about the limitations of good things to give you the life that you want. I was struck by the honesty of the author I would not say is normal of most people.
Right.
I think it's really hard to be as honest as he's being.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to look at something as good as a marriage or a great job and then be honest when those moments when you think this is as good as it can get and I'm still feel a little bit let down.
Yeah.
I think my practical kind of takeaway for our people was, will you have the courage to say those true things about your life to God and to other people as we do this? Because if you don't have the courage to tell that truth, then this truth will not hit the same way it's supposed to.
Right.
Because it's going to feel a little bit like, well, yeah, it would be nice to have a better life, but I feel good about mine. But those moments where you're thinking, I just got this job and I already don't kind of like it.
Yeah.
Or I had a great night with my friends and I woke up the next morning feeling really low.
Yeah.
Instead of just ignoring those things or numbing those things, to begin to say, those are all pointers to, no, you're made for the glory of God in a way where it makes even good things feel like vanity.
Yeah.
Because I'm made for an infinite being of beauty and love and truth. So even the best things here are going to feel a little bit tempered sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for anybody, not just Christians, to say that truth out loud. Right. So I think that was my practical takeaway is even in journaling or in praying, take notes of when you feel that letdown.
Yeah.
And honestly, ask God to remind you, say, God, remind me that you're pointing to me that I'm made for you.
Yeah.
So show me, because I actually think what Ecclesiastes is going to teach us is when God is the centerpiece, then his gifts can be enjoyed for what they are. And they're more enjoyable when he is actually God.
That's right.
So I think that's a practical piece is because if you have the courage to tell the truth about your life and the world, then you'll have the right posture to receive Jesus's interpretation of your life and the world. Yeah. And again, from my sermon, just thinking about the woman at the well who walked away and says, come here, a man who told me everything I ever did. It's like, come here from the person who can make sense of me better than I can. And I think that's what will happen if you start telling the truth to Jesus in prayer, but to other people in the church.
I love that. I love that. Tyler, what about you, Ross?
My real hope is that people would just let the Scripture do its work. Like let the questions actually rattle your cage. Let them press through. And then if you're a believer, really ask yourself, because there's this kind of duality set up in the text all the time of like, this is life under the sun, right? Which is a way of describing a life without the reality of God. If you live your life without the reality of God interrupting your life, here's the conclusion, right? But I don't think Christians actually escape that. So we believe in the ultimate reality of God, but we function as some kind of functional atheists most of the time because we don't let that reality interrupt how we view relationships or success
or like polytheists.
Or money.
I have different gods in different places.
Right. Yeah. And so I want the text to be able to go, but where are we living as if under the sun is the ultimate reality?
Right.
Where am I lacking congruence between my lived experience and what I actually claim to believe, because that's where Ecclesiastes is going to press us. Right. And that's where it's got joy and hope for us. So.
Well, that's what I was going to say too. The hope piece is so important because I think the greatest and kindest thing God can do is interrupt us in our toil and tell us it doesn't work out, right? Because the worst thing is that you actually do that your whole life and you end up and you find just like Coeleth did, like this isn't it, right? And so the kindest thing is really, and the hope that Christians can really have is, and maybe the depression we feel first is the sense of I can't do it on my own. And I think maybe that's the confrontation of this book is to say, no, that you aren't meant to find it here. It's actually a different place. And the hope that there actually is a place coming where our true joy and our true hope are going to be secure. And on the way, we can look to that hope and experience it.
And
now.
that congruent, like you said, life, the cohesive life is a fuller, richer, deeper one.
That's right.
Which is, I think the hope of this is that if you can tell the truth, like you're saying, about the difficulties and stare at hard things, you're not just doing it for the sake of it. You're doing it so my life can be more congruent, which means if it's more congruent in the kingdom, I'll be happier and more full and more rich because I'm building my life on truth.
That's good.
Not just a sort of disparate gods who lead me in different areas depending on which person I'm around, which job I'm in, which church service am I at. You know, we want people to have like integrated lives that actually are able to see Jesus in all of it.
And that does, just very briefly, reflect a slight danger of Ecclesiastes, right? In that it could be the radio head of the canon. In that it kind of just shows us everything that's wrong, but doesn't move us.
That's right.
Right towards towards the resolution, right? It doesn't ever get to the four chord and just let us kind of go like, oh, this
Beyond
feels better, right?
That's
it's
right.
like,
that's what melody
I'm
sounds
just going
like.
to leave you here in the minors. And I've been feeling that even from our posture of how we teach it and work through it is the ultimate goal is that we press through this towards hope, not that we become fatalistic
That's really
or nihilistic or narcissistic. We're not supposed to just stay there
That's right.
with those questions. So.
Well, to kind of wrap us up a little bit, let's do one more question where you guys tee us up for, and maybe even Ross, you can tee us up to what's coming next week. What can people look forward to in the text for next week?
Yeah, Kohelet, the preacher, really moves into giving examples over the next 3 sermons of different things that he's pursued, different avenues that he's pursued, right? Wealth and pleasure and success. But the first one that he kicks off with is knowledge. Also called wisdom. And it's going to be quite jarring for us because if you read Proverbs, it tells us that wisdom's pursuit is like the highest pursuit, right?
Yeah,
this is the best thing.
Yeah.
And the preacher's going to tell us like, I pursued wisdom and it was meaningless. And so we're going to have to ask the question, well, what does he mean by that? What kind of pursuit of wisdom is a dead end? And what kind of pursuit of wisdom leads to greater godliness? Because the scriptures clearly speaks of both. And so there must be a difference between those two. And so that's what this Sunday will be about. And I'm hopeful that because we're all wanting to know more. We all want more knowledge. We all want to be more wise.
Right.
But some of that's going to lead us down a dead-end path. Some of that's going to lead us to eternal life. And we hope to be able to distinguish between the two.
And a perfect cultural moment to preach this sermon because we've never had more access to knowledge and everyone feels miserable.
That's right.
We're bombarded with information, and you know, the more you know, the worse you feel. That's basically the summary statement of the text ahead. The more you know, the worse you're going to feel about the whole world. And so what do we do with that?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
that's good.
Yeah.
That's great.
All right, friends. Well, that's it for this week. Please remember that we'll be in Ecclesiastes all the way up until Thanksgiving this year. And so please do join us in one of our Sunday services across our 6 congregations. I also would say to you, please, it's not too late, get hold of one of these guides. You can grab them in the lobby of any one of our congregations. They're also online on our Ecclesiastes page. And they're just a helpful way for you to be able to process the sermons on your own or together in community with your friends or in a group. Lastly, we'd love to hear your questions. And so if you have questions related to our teaching of Ecclesiastes, please mail them to podcast@austinstone.org. And we'd love to get to answer some of those questions in the episodes ahead. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time, but hopefully before then, we'll see you at one of our services across the Austin Stone. See you then. Bye.